Garvey's philosophy, his convictions across times, shining as a beacon of clarity, pride, and purpose as we chart his way forward. Permit me to thank Professor Stanley Niaah, Director for the Center for Reparation Research, for engaging with us today on the timely theme, Beyond Apology, Reimagining Caribbean Identity through Garveyism and Reparatory Justice. I have no doubt that her presentation will spark a rich and lively discussion as we collectively explore and reflect on the relevance of Garvey's teaching in our continued pursuit of justice and identity. Thank you again for joining us at this very important celebration of our first national hero, and please enjoy the lecture and please join in the discussion that will ensue. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Executive Director of the IOJ. I now wish to invite Mr. Oliver Fagan, Board Chair of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, and Liberty Hall, to bring greetings.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, representatives of the Institute of Jamaica, special friends of Liberty Hall, you have all been comprehensively introduced by our Executive Director, and so I will repeat in saying thank you for being here and in sharing your Sunday with us here at Liberty Hall. As you all know, this is the 138th birthday of our national hero. But this lecture series does more than commemorate his philosophy, his opinions, and the fact of his birth and his life. This series of lectures is important in ensuring that Marcus Garvey remains relevant to the people of Jamaica today and to the new citizens of Jamaica that will continue to emerge. It is not an easy challenge to face in a society and indeed a world that is becoming far more secular and less respectful of iconic historical figures such as Garvey. And these are challenges that various societies across our world face. Here at Liberty Hall, we are dedicated to the task of preserving Garvey not as an artifact, but as a living legacy who, rather than that, can provide inspiration to every young person, every middle-aged person, every elderly person alive in this country today and beyond. And so one of the questions that we're gathered here to explore is, how is Garvey relevant to this controversial and important subject of reparations? Of course, Garvey was a controversial figure and he leaned into it happily. And so the question we are going to explore today is, how is Marcus Garvey, the philosopher, the activist, the politician, after all, he did found the People's Political Party in the 1920s, how is he relevant to this important discussion of reparations today, and how can his philosophy, his opinions, and the example of his life influence the political process, which is, in fact, the quest for reparations? That is the question that I ask you to give your kind attention to as we share this time together. On behalf of Liberty Hall, the Institute of Jamaica, and indeed the government of Jamaica, thank you.
Thank you, Board Chairman. The privilege is now mine to invite Mr. David Brown, representing our Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport, Mr. David Brown, to bring greetings.
Good afternoon, everyone. I know that the protocols have been observed, and I won't repeat the long list, but I wanted to, since I'm in this room, I was formerly a member of staff of this August Institute of Jamaica. And I remember when this space was being created, and it is a testament to the people such as Professor Lewis and the Friends of Liberty Hall, and the past director of the Liberty Hall, Ms. Donna McFarlane, of blessed memory, that we can gather in a space as comfortable as this to discuss the ideas of Garvey. And, you know, as Oliver had said, even more so now at a time when we think of political ideas and ideologies and ways forward. If we were to really think about Garvey's planks as part of the PPP, we would see that many of them, how forward-thinking he was, and how probably still many of them need to be instituted. I read Minister Granger's speech, and she asked me to extend her sincere apology for not being able here to fellowship with you in this discussion. As you know, this is a time when members of our political directorate are quite involved. Good afternoon. I welcome you to the 16th annual Marcus Garvey Lecture, aptly themed Beyond Apology, Reimagining Caribbean Identity through Garveyism and Reparatory Justice. Today, we honor the birth anniversary of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, not only to celebrate his extraordinary life, but to reflect on the profound relevance of his ideas for the Caribbean in the 21st century. Garveyism is more than a historical philosophy. Indeed, it is a living guide for our self-determination, cultural dignity, and the pursuit of our collective future. Our struggle has been unrelenting, grounded in the conviction that freedom without repair is incomplete. When the Emancipation Act was passed on 1st August 1834 in the Anglophone Caribbean, and the period of apprenticeship ended in 1838, the formerly enslaved received no land, no compensation, and no structural investment to support their new lives. Conversely, the European enslavers, by contrast, were awarded £20 million in compensation. For those emerging from bondage, freedom, or what was interpreted as freedom at the time, came tethered to restrictive labor laws, social exclusion, and the persistent economic marginalization. Yet, we as a collective group of peoples resisted through strikes, rebellions, and cultural assertion, preparing the ground for leaders like Marcus Garvey, who would carry the cause, our cause, to the world stage. Garvey understood that truth with clarity and force complemented persistence. He knew that our story could not be separated from our collective experience of the transatlantic trade, the cruelties of chattel slavery and colonialism, and those systems were designed deliberately to dehumanize our ancestors and generations thereafter, with attempt to sever our heritage and enrich European empire. Garvey recognized that the damage was not merely economic, but also political, psychological, cultural, and spiritual. He believed that restoring dignity, pride, and self-reliance was as essential as addressing material deprivation. I remember coming across a quote, Prof, where they said, the greatness of Marcus Garvey was not that he stimulated thought of ourselves, but through the work he did with UNIA and so was that he was actually the first salesman who sold the Negro to themselves. That's profound. Through the UNIA, founded here in Jamaica in 1914, Garvey built a global movement grounded in African pride, economic independence, and Pan-African unity. For him, reparations were not a favor, but a debt owed, a moral, political, and economic obligation that words alone could not discharge. Apologies, and I must say, apologies from those who are supposed to give us apologies, yes? Apologies, he acknowledged, could have symbolic value, but they could never substitute for meaningful repair. Garvey said, quote, chance has never yet satisfied the hope of a suffering people. And so, in his name, and in the name of our ancestors, we echo the call for the restoration of all, and I repeat, all that was taken from us. Today, his vision is echoed in the work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, established in 2013, which has set out a 10-point plan for reparatory justice. This plan calls for formal apologies, debt cancellation, cultural and educational investment, healthcare initiatives, and support for repatriation. It is a strategic, principled framework that places the Caribbean's claims squarely in the arena of international law and moral responsibility. Jamaica has been at the forefront of this effort, and the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport continues to advocate for reparations. Under the leadership of the National Council on Reparations, this country has developed a national policy on reparatory justice and recently petitioned, and I'm not sure how many people know this, and recently petitioned His Majesty King Charles III to have the Privy Council consider whether the transatlantic slave trade constituted crimes against humanity and whether reparations are legally due. I pause here to set the framework for which that will take place. In 1834, when that 20 million pounds was paid to the planter class as compensation for lost labor, because of the gravity of the matter, the loan was sought through a specific channel. What happened is that because that matter couldn't be dealt with, because it was such the gravity of the matter couldn't be dealt with in local courts, the Privy Council was pointed to as the area where the decision on compensation were made, and then the compensation made to the planters. What that channel allows is that for specific requests that are seen so great in their gravity that they cannot be discussed in civil court, that they are forwarded to the king for him to forward same to the Privy Council for advice. That loophole that sought to reimburse planters for lost labor happens to be the same loophole that we are now using to petition King Charles III to say, listen, we're asking you to ask your Privy Council if the experience of bondage and chattel slavery of the people of African descent in the British West Indies, if that constituted a crime against humanity, and if so, what are the penalties for it being considered a crime against humanity? So the very loophole that they sought to reimburse their own planter class is the same loophole that the ancestors and the descendants of our ancestors are using to say to Charles, fork up. And it is a decision and a strategy that is informed by some of our greatest legal minds that we have now, Frank Phipps, Bert Samuels, and the members of the NCR. And I must tell you that it is an idea that was presented formally to the cabinet. We did a presentation on what the strategies would be, and this proposal is going to be laid squarely through the Privy Council on King Charles III before the end of August 2025. And I know that Minister Green would want me to let you know that this development is taking place. It complements it certainly complements what CARICOM is doing with their own representation to King Charles. It is part and part of that activity. But I think the minister wanted to ensure that in as much as the way how Jamaica has led in these activities, that we lead in this particular one. The idea really was to have it served prior to independence, as part of the independence fervor and activities. But it certainly will be delivered and the summons sent to the Privy Council before the end of September. Minister's statement is much longer than this, but I think this is the kernel of what she wanted me to deliver. And because we have such an interesting presentation to look forward to, Prof, with your leave, I thank you for listening. And Minister Granger again expresses her sincere apology for not having been here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Now, we were privileged to have one musical performance by Miss Shalrika White, right? And then we enjoy that. Thank you very much, Miss Sharika White. And now we're going to have another performance, but this time from participants of the Liberty Hall Legacy of Marcus Garvey's Summer Arts Program 2025. And they'll be delivering two works, The Debate and Shades of Blackness, the summer program of Liberty Hall.
Marcus Garvey says, "The black skin is not a badge of shame, but rather a glorious symbol
of national greatness." Marcus Garvey's speeches emphasize on racial pride and self-resilience for people of African descent. He encouraged black people to embrace their heritage and to celebrate their skin color. Black is beautiful. Is me, no need for bleach, cause a blackness is me. Black is beautiful, black is me, no need for bleach, cause a blackness is me. Yombe, yombe, my yombe. Yombe, yombe, my yombe. Yombe, my yombe, my yombe. Black is me.
Black is beautiful, black is me. No need for bleach, I'm a blackness of me. Black is beautiful, black is me. No need for bleach, I'm a blackness of me. Black is beautiful.
All right, so let's clap them again, the participants of the Liberty Hall Summer Program. It is now my privilege to invite Miss Natolia Fairweather Sims, Sims, who serves as the librarian at Liberty Hall. And then Miss Sims will be introducing our distinguished speaker. Following the introduction, Professor, please feel free to make your lecture. Please greet Miss Sims and in due course, Professor Stanley Niaah.
Mr. David Brown, Director of Cultural and Entertainment Synergies, representing our Honorable Minister Grange. Mr. Oliver Fagan, Chairman of the Board of Management for the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, Jamaica Memory Bank, and Liberty Hall. Mrs. Michelle Creed Nelson, Executive Director of the Institute of Jamaica. Ms. Faith Anderson, Acting Deputy Director of the Institute of Jamaica. Mrs. Roddy Ann Dennis Copeland, Acting Director of Liberty Hall, The Legacy of Marcus Garvey. Other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good afternoon. I have the privilege of introducing to you our esteemed guest speaker, Professor Sonjah Stanley Niaah. Professor Stanley Niaah is a Jamaican scholar, cultural activist, writer, and international speaker. She's the first Ph.D. Cultural Studies graduate from the University of the West Indies and the first to be appointed lecturer, senior lecturer, and professor of cultural studies there. That deserves an applause, right? She's also the inaugural Rhodes Trust Rex Nettleford Fellow in Cultural Studies and has distinguished herself as a pioneer in the terrain of Caribbean cultural studies, specifically Black Atlantic performance geographies, popular music, cultures of entertainment, and the sacred. She's the author of the award-winning book, Dance Hall, From Slave Ship to Ghetto. She is also the editor of Dance Hall, a reader on Jamaican music and culture, the first compilation of seminal and current writings on dancehall music and culture, and I'm Broader Than Broadway, Caribbean Perspectives on Producing Celebrity, among others. She has also co-authored a study on the creative industry as a pillar of sustained growth and diversification, the film and music sectors in Jamaica, lessons from case studies of successful firms and ventures. Stanley Niaah has served the UWI in multiple capacities. She has been appointed in roles such as Director, Institute of Caribbean Studies, and the Reggae Studies Unit, Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, and Director of the Center for Reparation Research, through which she now spearheads programs to increase research, education, and advocacy around reparatory justice aligned with Garvey's mission. She holds international appointments as member of the International Scientific Committee of UNESCO's Roots of Enslaved Peoples Project and Senior Research Associate Honorary at Rhodes University. Professor Stanley Niaah serves on various boards and editorial collectives in academic associations, institutions, and journals. A heavily sought after speaker, so I need not say how lucky we were to get her to be here today. Her research and opinions have appeared in various local and international media, including The Guardian, BBC, The Washington Post, Netflix, NPR, Vice TV, Caribbean Beat, The Fader, Refinery 29, Rototom TV, and Pop Matters. Please join me in warmly welcoming to the lectern our guest speaker for today, Professor Sonjah Stanley Niaah.
Greetings and salutations, everyone. Wow. I see family, I see friends, I see colleagues, I see mentors, and I see a whole set of beautiful faces. Yes, welcome everybody. This podium is very interesting, and hopefully nothing is going to fall off. So let me set it up right. All right. Let's recall some great men in the words of Burning Spear. I greet you in the name of the ancestors on whose shoulders I stand as a daughter, a mother, a student, a Jamaican, a cultural scholar, a cosmopolitan, and today in my capacity as Director, Center for Reparation Research and Professor of Cultural Studies at the University of the West Indies. I greet you especially in the name of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, one of Jamaica's most important ancestors. We talk about him as our national hero, first national hero, but we don't often talk about him as our ancestor. One who was unapologetic in his quest for Black freedom, self-determination, and sovereignty. And we don't talk about our ancestors in some traditions, certainly not on a day like today, without pouring some libation for them. So I've asked for the plant to come. To our ancestors. I remember also today Donna McFarlane, the first director of Liberty Hall, who invested much in this institution we see today. And how can we forget stalwarts such as Queen Mother Samad? May their souls rest in perfect peace, and may they continue to inspire us. My sincere thanks to the team at Liberty Hall, the legacy of Marcus Garvey, a division of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport, especially Mrs. Rudy Ann Dennis Copeland and her team for the invitation to deliver the 16th annual Marcus Mosiah Garvey Lecture and the smooth process toward this staging. Now, talk the truth. Have you seen a Garvey Lecture receive this much publicity? Don't it? Analyze me, I tell. True. Great job on the part of the communications team, and I know Rudy Ann is steering that team very well. I also want to thank all of you for coming out. This is a Sunday. It is Marcus Garvey's birthday, but you could have stayed home, you could have watched it on PBCJ. Welcome to all those who are tuned in via PBCJ, who are tuned in via our YouTube channel. It is my pleasure to be with you today, and my hope is that we will leave with some greater clarity about who we are as a people. I suspect most of you here know all you need to know, though, but I see some young faces, and I know that we're going to have some discussion afterwards. As Jamaicans, as children of a Jamaica still in the making, still struggling with self-determination, economic advancement, and Black pride in the wake of Garvey's own sacrifices for our collective freedom, it is important that we celebrate days such as today. Let me confess that I am not a Garvey scholar. We have the preeminent Garvey scholar in our midst, and I want to recognize Professor Rupert Lewis. But I chose to accept the invitation to do this lecture because of the high degree of respect and honor I pay in my own work to the Right Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Jamaica's first national hero. Today, I pay homage through my words to those who have been a part of the struggle to return essential human rights to those people, particularly us people, particularly of African descent, who have been disenfranchised and excluded in the schemes of imperialism and neo-imperialisms that still confront us today. Now, I know that Minister Grange has already given the lecture, you know. David's presentation was formidable. Don't it? Let's clap. Let's clap the minister. She's always representing. But I'm going to say a thing or two. When I was in second form at Mount Alvernia High School, we were given an assignment in social studies class, which was to write about a figure that had provided inspiration. At 12 or 13 years old at the time, I did what was natural. I went home without any internet, searched the books I had in my house, and found the regular, we know the names, Encyclopedia Britannica, Encyclopedia International, and of course, I couldn't find anything about any Jamaican. Names such as Martin Luther King Jr. were, of course, available. And at the time, living in Jamaica, there was little scholarly or detailed information accessible on Garvey. Certainly not to be found in any of these compendiums. I therefore selected Martin Luther King Jr. and pay close attention here to the Black liberationist focus from them times, right? And I wrote a piece that got me the passing grade that I deserved. But what if I didn't have to wait till tertiary education to learn about Marcus Mosiah Garvey and his philosophies? Who would I have become? What if every Jamaican child from basic school was learning compulsorily about Marcus Garvey, engaging with his teachings and Black philosophies beyond cursory knowledge of his status as Jamaica's first national hero? While my own formation as an Africanist, a reparationist, a Caribbeanist, and simultaneously nationalist began in somewhat unconscious ways, does it need to be that way for all Jamaican citizens? And I begin with a series of questions, therefore, about the Caribbean and Jamaica simultaneously. Ultimately, who is the Caribbean citizen going to be, going to look like, going to sound like, going to think? How is that Caribbean citizen going to think in 2030? And I'm particularly referencing 2030 because there is such a thing called a Vision 2030. It's going to be 2030 in 5 years. What is this visioning, or what has this visioning, or how has it been materialized? More importantly, was the visioning underpinned by an agenda of repair? Let me say something about the title of this lecture and what I am aiming to share this afternoon from the standpoint of a cultural reparationist. Beyond Apology, Reimagining Caribbean Identity Through Garveyism and Reparatory Justice was provided by the team at Liberty Hall. Now, this was the first time in my entire career as an academic that I was provided a title by an entity inviting me to speak. Very first time. A winning move, and even more so, provocative title. But as all good academics know, stick to the limits of your expertise, your interests, and indeed, your politics. So I have changed the title in keeping with that politics. It's politics time, after all, and Jamaica will have nomination day and election day within days. I've inserted the word without. You see that, right? There you go. You must be wondering what's going on the screen there. I've inserted the word without while striking beyond, but I have left the two side by side in order to make a complex visual statement. There are those who would ask, in the context of the still nascent Caribbean reparation movement, how can we move beyond apology when most of the former colonial powers, their allies, supporting institutions, and enablers haven't even apologized for what American activist Malana Karenga referred to as the intentional holocaust of chattel enslavement of Africans under colonial and even neo-colonial structures, with consequences such as cultural genocide. We could also use the Swahili term maangamizi, or the maafa here as well, referring to the great underreported Black Holocaust, with some 2 million Africans dying as a result of the transatlantic shipment. The major point being made with the insertion of without is that while we are going beyond the apology, received or not, we are also placing on our agenda, unapologetically, a Garvey-inspired view of Caribbean development, today referencing Garvey's own manifesto as a starting point. How many of us have read Garvey's manifesto for the People's Political Party? One, David. Anybody else? 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, the hands are coming up slowly but surely. The history shows that Garvey in the West had greatest influence in Central and North America based on the contribution of Caribbean people forming a diaspora through migration for work in the building of these societies. Through the alignment of struggles among Africans in America, it's through the alignment of struggles among Africans in America that Garvey's influence grew. And you know, we heard earlier that the king is really not recognized in his own home, don't it? Yes. But we did remedy that. Arguably, Marcus Garvey's philosophies, which influenced Central and North America, remain obscure in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. And when I say obscure, I'm talking about the thing I said earlier about children compulsorily in school learning about Garvey. It's still a choice for teachers to teach Garvey at certain levels. Some of us may be able to recite the gems shared commonly around the globe when Marcus Garvey is being deliberately mentioned. We can recite, "Up you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will," "Africa for Africans," perhaps the most popular of the gems accounting for Marcus Garvey's place in a mapping of Jamaica's country brand. And there's a slide there with the country brand index, which we can look at. You might have to go back to that, but yes, it's further down. But how many of us can recite or refer to Garvey's spoken word? Well, apart from Stephen Golding, Professor Lewis, some of us. From Negro rights, history, religion, the press, enslavement, youth, to thoughts of a new Jamaica, education, economic power, Haile Selassie, Garvey spoke on all of them. For example, on economic power, Garvey said in 1919, "Develop yourselves into a commercial and industrial power, and you will have laid the foundation for racial greatness." He also said, and I quote, "The world is indebted to us for the benefits to civilization. They stole our arts and sciences from Africa." In 1927, Garvey said, "Sons and daughters of Africa, I say unto you, take on the toga of race pride and throw off the brand of ignominy, which has kept you back for so many centuries. Dash asunder the petty prejudices within your own fold. Set at defiance the scornful designation of nigger, uttered even by yourselves, and be a Negro in the light of the Pharaohs of Egypt, Simons of Cyrene, Hannibals of Carthage, Louvertures and Dessalines of Haiti, Blydens and Barclays and Johnsons of Liberia, Lewises of Sierra Leone, and Douglases and Dubois of America, who have made and are making history for the race." End of quote. George Padmore, Louis Farrakhan, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., C.L.R. James, Bob Marley, Claude McKay, Ivy Baxter, Rex Nettleford, Perry Hensel are all in a pool of persons locally and internationally, some have passed, who have been influenced by Garvey. All of them have passed. Yes, all of them have passed. We have to pour some more libation. We can't call up the ancestors' names and don't just, on a day like today. What if we didn't have the singers and players of instruments to help jog our memories when their recordings around National Heroes Day, Independence Day, and Garvey's birthday? With their recordings. The well-known recordings, we know them, from Burning Spear's Marcus Garvey, Old Marcus Garvey, to Garvey's Ghost from Max Romeo and the Upsetters, Redemption Song, Bob Marley's own reciting of Garvey's 1937 speech, Black Star Line, I Must Come, Prince Farai. There's a whole litany of them. I return to the question, however, who is the Caribbean citizen in 2030? At its simplest, identity is how a person, group, or nation understands and expresses who they are and distinguishes themselves from others. It is simultaneously an inclusive as well as an exclusive category by which people associate, achieve a sense of belonging and collective consciousness, a means by which people posture even around Olympics, independence, and so on. In our case, Caribbean identity is diverse and complex, but wholly intact. It is made up of multiple layers. We can talk about personal identity, cultural identity, historical identity, political identity, collective identity. But for the Caribbean, identity is particularly complex because, and we know, African heritage, we're talking about the history of enslavement, the resistance traditions, marronage, European colonization, and the effect on things like language, the creolization process, indigenous legacies. We can talk about the Tainos and Kalinagos, the Indian, Chinese, Middle East influences that would have increased the level of diversity here. And of course, the diasporic connections, migrations to Britain, Canada, the USA, and so on. Terms such as Creole identity, multicultural identity, plural identity, plantation society have all been used, born from mixing, struggle, and survival, but also that has often been distorted by colonial ideas about race, class, and worth. If there is any confusion, Garvey's relevance to strengthening Caribbean identity today is undoubtable. Garvey's philosophies and opinions offer tools for reclaiming and affirming Caribbean identity in the 21st century. Consider these facts. Centering African heritage, Garvey taught that Africa is the root, and no Caribbean identity is complete without understanding the African contribution to culture, spirit, and history. Building economic self-reliance, Garvey linked identity to control over production and trade. He understood that Caribbean identity would be weakened when economies depend entirely on foreign imports or the tourist dollar. His cooperative economics model would help the region define itself as a producer, not just a consumer. Promoting regional unity, Garvey envisioned a united black world. For the Caribbean, that means transcending island rivalries and working as one in trade, diplomacy, and cultural promotion, something we are still yet to fully achieve. A unified Caribbean identity is more powerful on the global stage than isolated national identities. What about reclaiming history and narrative? Garvey insisted we write our own history. That means telling the story of slavery or enslavement, resistance, independence, and migration from our own perspective. Cultural sovereignty, advocating for reparations, all of these were well within Garvey's own narrative. Garvey's relevance today lies in his ability to give Caribbean people a clear, unapologetic framework for self-definition, one that resists colonial hangovers, values African roots, and unites economic, political, and cultural power. As Burning Spear reminds us, no one remembers old Marcus Garvey, but we come to make them remember. Remembering Garvey is not about nostalgia, it's a blueprint for the future. And that future is a future of repair. What would a manifesto, a 10-point plan, if you will, for manifesting the Caribbean citizen Garvey envisioned in 2030 or 2040 look like? Julius Garvey, son of Marcus Garvey, in an article published in 2015, said to a large extent he is convinced, as I am today, that colonial and globalization forces, indeed neo-colonial and neo-globalization forces, have undermined our attempts at self-determination, a process which has sabotaged the achievements around independence and Caribbean federation. But as this is the more important bit, to a larger extent, and I quote, "We are still inflicting that self-damage," says Julius Garvey. Garvey was unapologetic in his quest for repair, internal repair, to counter that self-damage. When we talk about repair, reparatory justice, or reparation in the Caribbean context, it is directly related to making right the wrongs of the past as a result of colonialism, transshipment of Africans against their will, chattel enslavement, indigenous genocide, and the continuing legacies of these crimes against humanity. The modern reparation movement is built on principles espoused by Garvey. There is an umbilical link. The navel strings are buried under the same banana tree. But first, let us delve a bit deeper into the substance of Garvey's legacy, Garvey's philosophy, which must continue to be a guide for Caribbean identity construction. Consider the following, and I quote from Garvey. It is peculiar and particular philosophy. It is the peculiar and particular philosophy that is to emancipate you and me from the thraldom, a word that means a state of being a slave or being under the control of another person. How many of us know the term thrall? I'm a teacher, you know, so forgive me. Thraldom? Yes. It is the peculiar and particular philosophy that is to emancipate you and me from the thraldom of other philosophers, and these teachers shall go out and teach that philosophy as probably Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and more recent philosophers have taught. When you and I go to college and read the textbooks, we come out just good enough slaves intellectually and mentally to serve the masters. The purpose of the UNIA is to emancipate, and our primary duty is to emancipate your minds, because it is the mind that takes the man, that directs the man, that makes the man, that directs the man. It is the mind that makes the man, the race, and all that you see, material, artistic, and otherwise of nature, is man's mind working upon nature. End of quote. This was in 1937 as Garvey stood before a crowd in Ontario, Canada, shedding light on the path to power he demanded for us to recognize the truths of our past and strive for better. Today I stand before you and reiterate this call. Just shy of 90 years from this speech, the citizens of Jamaica still retain a colonized mindset, one fostered by the retention of colonial era legislation and systems. While our reparation advocates stand up to our oppressors, demanding compensation for the crimes against our ancestors, at home we maintain the systems which they instituted to oppress. We must follow the directives set by our first national hero and emancipate our minds. We can't just sing it, we must do it. The threads of our first national hero's wisdom are foundational to many of our national cultural movements. Building on the resilience of our ancestors, those enslaved under the colonial project, and yet the legislation to fully free him from the charges brought against him while he was alive was not instituted until 2018, 78 years after his death. The charges brought against Garvey were all intent on silencing his activism for black people. It was only this January that President Biden pardoned him for the infamous mail fraud case, which then resulted in the suit against him in Jamaica for seditious libel. Fala fashion. While Jamaica was slightly ahead with the national heroes and other freedom fighters, the Abolition from Criminal Liability in Respect of Specified Events Act, the retention of the charges for as long as they ensued leaves an undeniable stain on our history. The movement for reparation was formalized in Jamaica in 2007 to actively pursue reparative justice, and we heard David Brown speak about some of that. Our internal work has not had the desired progress, however, and even with the petition to King Charles III, we are still yet to achieve the levels of reparatory justice that we want, and it's a nascent movement. It's a nascent movement. The modern reparation movement is nascent, right? It's young. Even with the formal action towards republic via a new constitution, we will see the unyielding influence of colonial era mindsets. We have only to look at the fact that the Charter of Freedoms and Rights has not been altered at all to reflect Jamaica's modern reality. It's the same old, racist, prejudicial European standards and ideals. The reality is we are still chained in our minds to the ideas instituted by those who held us in bondage nearly 200 years ago. The system is flawed and continues to disenfranchise us. Town and Country Planning Act, Vagrancy Act, Noise Abatement Act, Obia Act, the lunacy laws, all work in tandem, and these are just some examples, to persecute black people and institute Eurocentric ideals. I have spoken publicly and published on the negative impacts of these legislative instruments that hold up the borders of a prison that negatively impacts our people, from cultural, economic, and social bonds to physical and mental struggles. The vagrancy law is a direct inheritance from the colonial era, a time when laws were explicitly used to control the movement and behavior of formerly enslaved black people. This law, by making it illegal to be without a fixed abode or a visible means of support, was not a tool for maintaining public order. It was a tool for oppression. It was a means to criminalize the very existence of those who had been denied land, denied wealth, and opportunity. Today, while it may not be used in the same way, its legacy lives on. And I keep saying, why haven't we followed Rwanda's example to look at the laws and repeal those that no longer serve us? They struck 1,000 laws from their books. It never needed a big constitutional reform process. Okay. Everybody knows that I speak in very, very straightforward ways. Today, while it may not be used in the same way, its legacy lives on. It continues to be used disproportionately against the poor, black, and marginalized who are effectively restricting their freedom and mobility and referencing a cycle of poverty and criminalization. Why is it that Jamaicans cannot access their beaches freely? Let's touch that one again now. The Town and Country Planning Act, and specifically the Beach Access Act, states that all beaches belong to the government. The government has been steadily leasing and straight up selling the country's beaches, beachfront properties, for decades. And now there's very little of the wide sandy beaches for local Jamaicans to enjoy without shelling out a pound of flesh. Buju Banton provides a melodious soundtrack for this in his song, Country for Sale. According to the government, there are 60+ free public beaches around the island. What they do not say is that much of these remaining free beaches are experiencing high levels of erosion. The beach is diminishing with each passing storm, and many more have become too rough to swim or enjoy. The number of safe and accessible beaches is significantly less today, and for those who seek to make their living on the beach or surrounding waters, this reality is a death toll. I could go on to talk about the Charter of Freedom and Fundamental Rights, but I'm going to skip some of this because, well, I shouldn't skip some of that. But it's directly referencing the Obia Act and how that became something, a practice, a spiritual practice of our ancestors that was criminalized around the infractions with Maroons. So the language of the Obia Act successfully villainized the practice with phrases such as for the use of frightening any person and misinterpreting it in a vague definition of the occult. If you dig deeper, you'll understand that Obia, O-B-I-A, not O-B-E-A-H, and there's a whole movement to repeal the Obia Act. We need to be able to delve into an understanding of our ancestors and their practices so that we don't continue the self-damage, and certainly not have them enshrined, this kind of damage enshrined in our laws. As people of African descent, where have we been given the space to be black without boundaries? Persecution and hatred. We ourselves continue to hold ourselves back internally, physically, spiritually, and psychically, spiritually, and physically by our refusal to decolonize our minds. We sing redemption song, praise our national heroes, and still honor the ideals of colonizers. Where does Caribbean identity begin and colonialism end? Marcus Mosiah Garvey has been a guiding voice for identity, preaching self-determination and self-sustainability since the early 20th century. His wisdom is intrinsic to the movement for reparatory justice, but we need to, as advocates, look closely at our own country, legislative instruments, governance, and our citizens. For too long, we have been complacent at home. We must aggressively pursue reform right here. This has to do with our own complicity with the status quo and a strange attachment to the colonial regime. However, in the language of reparation, we cannot actually achieve a true post-colonial world with the chains of the past tied firmly to us with flawed colonial legislation and charges. We can no longer apologize for the oversight of our founding fathers. We must change the way we operate as a country and as a region. Jamaica can become the ideal free black decolonized nation. You know that there are people around the world who actually see Jamaica as that already. When I travel and I speak to people, they tell me that Jamaica is that beacon of light in the black world from which they gain inspiration and confidence. This is not hearsay now. Them tell me to my face with my own ears listening. We have only to pursue the ideals Garvey wanted for us: black pride, self-reliance, and African unity, believing that black people could achieve equality and respect through economic, political, and cultural success. We can only achieve these things by decolonizing the existing oppressive systems. We must not accept the bare minimum. We must truly emancipate ourselves from colonial mindsets. We remain aware, however, that since the 1890s, the British tried to eradicate influential religio-racial leaders. In the mid-1920s, blacks who promoted black nationalism were deemed by the colonizers as a threat to their interest and colonial rule. We are no longer in a British colonial era with a British colonial government that sought to explicitly crush the activities which oppose the colonial order. We no longer operate with big stick policies and measures to suppress emancipating our minds and country. We, however, remain shackled with mental slavery as a chronic result of the past. The evidence of this lies in the way we have never sought to outline and systematically transform the education system to respond to the question, who is the Caribbean citizen in 2030? Jamaica, other Caribbean territories, indeed CARICOM as a body, have all engaged in activities for educational reform in the last decade. If you look at CARICOM's website, you will see Jamaica as well. There has been an educational reform process, big report in 2023, which the Ministry of Education, I'm assuming, is working to implement. But I have little faith in the expected outcomes because they are not aligned with Garvey's ideals for us. They are not aligned with the need for reparation. They are not aligned with a vision of equality, justice, and collective unity for people of African descent. Why do I say this? We have only to look at the meaning of the word reform to understand that we can never transform our reality with fixing broken colonial structures never intended to have us flourish. Jamaica and other territories continue to fail the education test, not just in the slipping pass rates annually, but in the way we remain content in reproducing minds that are enslaved versus liberated. I am an outlier, I'm here to tell you. I am an outlier. Many of you sitting in this room are outliers because you are radical enough to go against the grain of what you were told in school and how you were to behave and how you were to think. I am an outlier in my family. The CARICOM 10-point plan for reparation is born of the same vision that Marcus Garvey had, the same vision for restitution and compensation as the Abuja Proclamation of 1993 at the historic first Pan-African Conference on Reparations held in Nigeria. The same vision was seen in the National African American Reparations Commission established in 2015, which developed a 10-point plan for reparatory justice based on CARICOM's model. The 10-point plan was updated, the CARICOM 10-point plan was updated in 2018 and is currently being updated again, soon to be available for public scrutiny. And we heard in David's presentation what those 10 points were, so I won't repeat them, except to say that point number 10, monetary compensation, revisions are being made to the plan to highlight elements such as historical legacies around gender, climate justice, among others, and there was conversation to remove or to change the title monetary compensation, but I wanted to touch on this a little bit to say regarding point number 10 of the plan, there have been initiatives to quantify the damages and determine the corpus of resources due to the region for transatlantic chattel enslavement. Key among them are the Beckford report in 2005 and the Brattler report on quantification of 2023, and these are Googleable. They are online available for you. Estimates of Britain's black debt have ranged from 7.5 million pounds, 7.5 trillion to US 24 trillion. And there have been demands and some reparation wins, especially in the form of commitments. Some of those I won't bother to go through, but logically requesting apologies from governments of former colonial powers, UK, France, Portugal, Netherlands, Spain, Denmark, Germany, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway. Private corporations as well, Lloyds of London, Bank of England, and so on. Universities, Harvard University, Cambridge University, Brown University, Princeton, and so on. There are also faith-based institutions, families. You might have heard of the heirs of slavery. There are those who have apologized and have, in fact, set up programs within some of our countries, Grenada, and so on. Some demands, there are specific examples. The Netherlands, some of you may have heard in the news recently, demands. Netherlands has already apologized, and there are challenges around this. They have also committed funds, but sent the funds, or committed the funds to the region, but are sending most of the funds back to the Netherlands. Very complicated. United Kingdom, the UK has highest historical responsibility in our region. Reparations could reach billions, but we face some political resistance. Lloyds of London, they have faced reputational risks. The financial settlements could reach billions if scaled up. And there are examples, families, the Gladstone family, some commitments from Harvard University in terms of their own research. Most recently, we heard of the University of Edinburgh in terms of their own links to slavery. So let me go now to talk about a manifesto of the People's Political Party, which is where I will end. In the final analysis, I want to bring our attention to Garvey's People's Political Party, the very first political party in Jamaica, established in 1929, following his return to Jamaica upon release from incarceration in the United States. Colonizers perceived Garvey's party as a threat to the status quo because it was decolonial in its outlook, and there was a direct demand for independence from colonial powers such as Britain. As Charles Price highlighted, the PPP candidates had been described in the Jamaica Gleaner as spouting noxious doctrines introduced to an ignorant minority, a criminal minority, and it is always possible that these might at any moment, and I am quoting, being intoxicated by foolish doctrines, break out of control and suffer the consequences. End of quote. Are we now living in a different Jamaica? A different Caribbean? I want to say yes. If Marcus Garvey was here today in 2025, what would a manifesto of the People's Political Party sound like? How can we honor Garvey's legacy with tangible visioning to achieve true liberation for Caribbean people who walk on the earth with black pride? The manifesto detailed items such as 8-hour work week, 8-hour workday, minimum wage, technical schools for each parish, national park at racecourse, legal aid department for the poor, many of which were achieved. Still waiting on the National Park at Racecourse. I implore you to read the manifesto of Garvey's People's Political Party. I don't know what you're looking at up there now. Okay, great. All right. The time has come for a new political awakening. Here's my interpretation of a Garvey manifesto for brothers and sisters of Jamaica and the West Indies, as the young people would say, in Garvey's voice. Here are the 10 priorities for the redemption and advancement of our people. Land for the people, agricultural self-sufficiency. Garvey's principle, the land belongs to those who till it. We will distribute idle, crown, and foreign-owned estates to working families, cooperatives, and community farms. No nation can be free if it must import its bread. Universal education rooted in African heritage. Education shall teach the history of the African race, the genius of our ancestors, and the dignity of our heritage. I'm totally not following these pages now. All right. Industrial development and cooperative economics. Establish black-owned factories, shipping lines, and trading companies to replace dependency on foreign merchants. Cooperatives will keep profits within the community, just as Garvey envisioned with the Black Star Line. Reparation as a right, not a favor. Slavery built the wealth of Europe and America. We demand restitution for centuries of stolen labor and land. Political autonomy and federal Caribbean unity. End colonial governance, move toward a United States of the Caribbean bound by African solidarity. Regional unity will strengthen our bargaining power in world trade and diplomacy. Cultural renaissance and protection of indigenous art forms. Reggae, kumina, Nyabingi drumming. These are not just musical assets, but weapons of cultural survival. We will find cultural institutions and guard against foreign exploitation of our art. Health sovereignty and herbal or traditional medicine. Every community will have clinics, trained midwives, and knowledge of traditional healing alongside modern medicine. This ensures resilience in the face of imported pharmaceutical monopolies. Maritime and shipping control. As Garvey built the Black Star Line, so shall we invest in Caribbean shipping. Control of trade routes means control of destiny. No more paying foreign ships to carry our own goods. Housing and infrastructure for dignity. And we have heard the very loud pronouncements about achievements in relation to providing housing on the part of the administration, the current JLP administration. And we laud that kind of provision. Every community, as Garvey built the Black Star Line, so shall we invest in Caribbean shipping, but the housing and infrastructure for dignity. Replace slums with planned communities, clean water and electricity. In 2025, we still have Jamaican communities that are just people having to go to a standpipe to get water. Employment for local tradesmen in building projects will circulate wealth internally. Spiritual and moral liberation. Reject the inferiority complex planted by colonialism. We will build a society rooted in mutual respect, family, unity, and the knowledge that we are a great and mighty people. I want to just leave us with some touch points. Absolute political determination. Economic independence through cooperative enterprise. Pan-African unity as a strategic necessity. Reparations and restorative justice. Land redistribution for national food security. Education for liberation. Cultural sovereignty. Technological mastery. Defense of sovereignty. Moral and spiritual revival. In conclusion, I want to say to us, our mission must be for self-determination. must be for economic independence, must be for reparations, must be for Pan-African unity, must be for land and food. Forward ever, backward never. One aim, one God, one destiny. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Professor Stanley Niaah. It's tradition that we have Q&A. You'll be willing, yes? So we'll have some questions. Keep them short, sweet, and exciting. All right, short so that the professor can hear them, interpret, and offer a nice response. The first one, there's going to be a roving mic. So there's one, raise your hands. Two, the gentleman after. So the lady standing, then the gentleman in the cap, then gentleman in the white shirt. Right. So they're lining up right there. Chances are we're being recorded and so forth. So please state your name and introduce yourself, and then ask your questions. Short and sweet, eh? All right.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Beckford.
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Doc. Hi, Professor. How are you? I found, let me first say that I found the mapping that you placed there to be most interesting, and what jumped out at me was crime under that heading of notoriety and innovation. But I really want to ask you, I know that reparation, you are on a quest to have reparations on the lips of every single individual in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. I know that. And if that is going to happen, you spoke of education and so on. But in a real way, though, this is a lecture that is saying Garvey said reparations. I discovered this myself, not in the Colombian sense, just my own coming to consciousness at UWI when you taught me. But it's the first time I heard it articulated that Garvey said reparations was actually about 2 years ago online at a lecture that Professor Lewis gave. And I said, I've never heard anybody say that out loud. My question for you is, Professor, how do you suggest that we rebrand spaces like these, the Liberty Hall? I love the Liberty Hall. I take my students here. I come here all the time. But how do we explicitly say this so that reparations now becomes a part of everything and every space and not just skirt around it to say, Garvey did this, Garvey did that? A space like Liberty Hall, how can we now rebrand that? Change the narrative to say directly reparations is what we're about. It's only one mission, and that is it.
Thank you for your question, Melissa. Let me use the word sport as an example. Every child in Jamaica knows what sport is. You go into a basic school, and you are oriented to sport by virtue of your being placed in a house. Don't it? Yes. And the house had a color, and you have a day, afternoon of a day, usually designated for physical education, don't it? So why we not do the same thing with Garvey? Why we not do the same thing with reparation? It requires a policy decision. That's all that is required. And what does a policy decision require? Political will. So what we have, and I spoke of myself as an outlier, first of all, what we have are institutions with some very dedicated, spirited teachers who have been carrying the burden of educating and radicalizing our youth in the dimensions that we need. How are we going to fix that? We don't need outliers. We need teacher training that is going to be routinized and centered on Garvey's mission. In other words, Garvey is not appetizer. Garvey is not, this side performance. Garvey is not the song and dance on the program. Garvey is the main agenda. Everything else must follow after that. And you know, I feel like I want to cry, because I go back to the question, what if I was learning about Garvey's philosophies as the main agenda when me who became an outlier and radicalized anyway, what if I really had learned about Garvey from the very start? What would have happened? Who would I have become? So, to answer your question, Melissa, it requires political will. It requires some very strategic and bold moves. And 2025, I don't see why we can't get it done. We're in 2025, people. Next question. Yes?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am Raymond Robinson, Vice President of the Mountain View Avenue Marcus Garvey Movement.
Welcome.
Thank you. May I ask, Professor Lewis and Cooper have blessed our presence, but I noticed in your 10-point 230 plan, nothing mentioned about the noble Professor Lewis and Cooper, who taught me at the University of the West Indies to respect Marcus Garvey. And may I suggest that this meeting petition our government to make 17th Marcus Garvey's birthday a public holiday. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir. I suppose you perhaps came in a little bit late, because at the beginning, I said, through my story about Mount Alvernia High School, where I didn't have access to writings on Garvey and so on, there was no internet, and I was moved to dig up out of the encyclopedias in my house. In fact, I called my mother recently to ask her. She's sitting right here in this audience with my sister and other members of my family, to ask her what was the name of the encyclopedia that was there. And they couldn't remember, so I had to go Google them, right? But I did say that one should not have to wait until they get to tertiary level institutions like me to learn about who we are as a people and to learn about figures such as Garvey. So I'm sorry that you didn't hear that. And if it didn't come across in that way, I'm saying it again now for you to hear, sir. Thank you. Yvonne?
Forward ever, backward never. In Ghana, there's a saying that once somebody's name is called, the person is alive. And I want to bring Kwame Nkrumah into this room. I bring him into this room because essentially, I learned about Marcus Garvey from the Ghana, from the country, Ghana, where I was privileged to live for several years. And when I got there, I was so curious about this person who was at the center of Kwame Nkrumah's philosophy that I actually had to go to the library. So it's a library in Ghana that taught me about
what if,
help me to value.
What if?
I want to say that we clearly continue to have issues, and I wanted to draw attention to one of those issues. And that issue is about the lives of our young men. Up to a couple of days ago, 201 young men had been killed by the police. And I could use a stronger word, which would be murdered. But because that's what it is, by the police in this country. And seemingly with the acquiescence, if not encouragement, of those who govern and are in charge. Drawing our attention to that, reparations is needed, or whatever comes before reparations is needed now for our young men.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. There is no need for me to add any words to what you've said, except to say that I endorse them, that as a country, We have to look at our young people. I've written, this is nothing about you all in front of me now, and certainly not our guests online. I've written off the adults. They've already been socialized. They have been formed in the ways that they have been formed. I am interested in our youth. We have to do something radically different to regain their attention, to save them. Nolly?
Thanks.
I'm so happy to be able to call everybody in here by their first name, Lord.
Well, I'm glad she brought up Nkrumah, because one of the things about him that I remember reading is he says, think like someone of action and act like someone of thought. And that's a good segue into my question about the action. And that has to do with the fact that all the reparations work that's being done is still pretty much being processed in the current way we know how to do things, or we've been taught how to do things. And I wonder if to get legislation moving faster, and to perhaps get faster action from the colonizers, if there's a point at which you think we might move to using Trump's playbook and put pressure in more militant ways, like withholding CARICOM's 15 votes, or applying it in ways that can hurt them and use it as a bargaining chip, imposing tariffs on all the products they send here, all the food they send here. I know it sounds a bit radical, as this gentleman is now pointing out to me. So I just wonder, at what point can we get to being very militant about making demands? And my last question, one part of that too, is you mentioned education liberation. It seems to me that one of the things that you could be pushing was replacing the textbooks we've read.
Absolutely. So we have a way in meetings at the university when something comes up that we need to either, let's say, move forward or not, we say supported. And I want to say supported to Nolly's comment. He wants us to take up arms, clearly, in a metaphorical way, I'm going to say today. And I want to push a little further to say, I am on that path with you, and I want to add visa reciprocal policies. We shouldn't have anybody coming to our shores who don't need a visa to come here, and we need a visa to go to their country. This. And we are the ones still in fear that they won't bother to come to experience our rich cultural assets as they have been doing all these years. We are afraid. We're still in a colonial mindset about who we are. People are still going to come. I mean, we could use the example of Turkey. You land at the border and you can pay $20 to get a visa. It doesn't have to be a big bureaucratic process. Tomorrow, if we wanted, we could have a reciprocal visa policy in place. So, supported. The second part of your question, though, about educational liberation, obviously we would have to change the textbooks. We would have to retrain teachers. We would need to revise those textbooks, have new textbooks, refocus education. Because Garvey would then become the main agenda. Garvey's philosophies and opinions would become the main agenda, not the appetizer. William?
Good afternoon. Well, my name is William. I'm traveling all the way from Great New Jersey. I did study Garvey back in college in Rutgers. What I found out there was that there was a lot of collections on Garvey, more than what's in Jamaica, especially at the New York, the Schomburg Center. So I could see why Garvey was so received back in the States, in which you had mentioned about some of those byproducts from Garvey are dead, but Farrakhan is still alive.
Yes.
Yeah, but Garvey impact throughout the world was so renowned more than in Jamaica. Because I guess when he came back, he was also put in jail here. When he ran for mayor in Kingston, he was railroaded. So I think, once again, a king is never a king in his own land. And I think he's better received overseas. But how you change when our religion is still the same? That's a big challenge. How do you address that?
Excellent question. So we talked about changing education, and I did speak about spiritual liberation as well, the kind of psychic and so on. And I want so I don't need to say too much more about your comment in relation to Garvey's acceptance outside of Jamaica. I did say that North and Central America, where he had been, the influence there was primary. But spiritual, the religion, I mean, I talked about the criminalization of obia. And of course, if you understand obia, there's a whole classification under this word Mayalism. One of the things that the colonizers knew was that black people were not giving up their African religions. Today, 2025, I'm talking about at emancipation. Today in 2025, we have been so rooted in a sort of Christian moral ethic that we have dished aside our, we try to forget about the African spirituality that lives within us. But we are still there, it doesn't leave us because we're dreaming. And some of us are very respectful of our dreams. There are ways in which we understand that ancestors talk to us, visit us, help to heal us, provide us with knowledge about how it is we must engage in our daily practices. So I think, though, that there's a certain way in which if we reform education to become sovereign learners in the way that Clinton Hutton talks about it, we are going to be able to shed, and certainly if we're learning about African societies, we never learned about African history in school. I remember when we made a mistake in geography class in Mount Alvernia High School where I attended, and my parents went out and bought Southern Continents as a book that we were supposed to use in geography, only to be told when we got to school that we're not going to do the African continent. So there is something fundamental about the shift of geographical reason in relation to what it is we are learning. We learn enough about the colonizers now. In other words, we know enough about them. We need to now refocus ourselves to learn about ourselves. Woolmer's also, many high schools, there were no high schools teaching, yes.
My high school taught overly high.
African history? Yes. African history. You were in, perhaps it was an outlier, a teacher, who decided to make that decision. Correct. That was not routinized.
All right.
Osa.
Wagwan. One of the things that I observed, we speak about spirituality, and Fanon spoke about the effectiveness of the colonial in going into our past and demonizing it. And once we begin to become exposed to institutions, and you spoke about that too, that taught us how to hate ourselves. And then those persons become educators in schools. And even some of our esteemed entertainers demonize obia. Even Rastafari brethren demonize it. And because of the popularity of mass entertainment, and because of the popularity of education, there are history teachers who teach students that Garvey was a thief. And so you have to be fighting against people who are educated in the systematic way in which the colonizers left for them to be educated. And so when you speak about curriculum change, it is intrinsic that the Ministry of Education and wherever those representatives are here, that they need to come to the table too as well.
To be retrained.
To be retrained themselves in order to decolonize the minds of the people who are going to teach teachers.
Yes.
And I visit Fanon again. Every time I read that comment about Fanon, when he says the colonizers went into your past, demonized that, and then taught you that demonized past, and then now review up, and you feel that you now are educated to go teach people how to heal themselves. I never learned about Garvey until I embraced Rastafari, because I went to a school, and yesterday some friends and I were talking about it. I went to a school who tell you that them don't like Rasta because we're dangerous. And the headmaster said, you are dangerous because you're teaching people not about Rasta, but about Marcus Garvey. And that's a very simple. So no question, just a comment.
And it reminds me all the time, obviously, of Bob Marley's Lions Man. Total destruction, the only solution. It no means they must mash up everything, you know. But something must dash. Some things you have to dash away. Start from scratch. Because the question is, who is the Caribbean citizen in 2030? And what is the education system that's going to take us to the realization of that citizen? Mr. White?
Good afternoon.
Yes.
My concern has to do with Christianity and its impact and its use by the colonials to really indoctrinate us in a particular philosophy against ourselves. And I thought the brother you were going to respond to him. I think you kind of sidestepped that question in relation to, does Garvey have a position in relation to Christianity? And how does Christianity figure into the overall reparation process? Thank you.
So I told you that I'm not the Garvey scholar, don't it? I did. Professor Lewis is right here. But Garvey had opinions about religion. And he was very clear that we needed to study our own African history and religions. So we have laid ourselves very careless to continue to be without question conscientized through the colonizer's religion. The Queen of England, the King of England is also the head of the church. There was no separation between church and state. And if you think today there's a separation between church and state, just go into any school or institution and know that there's a prayer in the Christian format that accompanies every devotion, every, board meeting in a government organization and so on. We are still not honoring the ancestors who practice other things.
Yes.
Very clear.
One love.
Oh.
This is not a question, this is just a suggestion. I would love, if the Garvey Association here, if they could put a mic, a speaker outside, that's all the activity in here that is going on, the people can hear it outside.
Yes.
Please, very important.
All right, we're going to take up a collection. Excellent suggestion. We're going to take up a collection to be able to buy that speaker. It's simple. It's a simple thing.
Well,
greetings.
Greetings. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am so impressed with your lecture, but I want to say this to you. It's like a conversation almost, right? Everywhere I go in the world, we talk about Garvey. We talk about education. I go to Africa. It's the same colonial mentality. I go to Latin America. It is the same colonial mentality. At some point, yes, I agree that the schools need to do something, but it's not just here. It is throughout the African diaspora. That's one thing. And at some point, it has to be that it is each one teach one. In order to get the flow that we want, although yes, it has to be in education. Yes, it has to be in Christianity when we realize that Africa, the Bible is Africa. Egypt is in Africa. Israel is a part of Egypt. When the Israelites left Egypt, Egypt, where did they go? Exactly. So all of that. So I just think that, I'm so glad that all the things that you've said. But I also want to say one thing is that I want to emphasize what you also said about ancestors. When I was a little girl, they would say the old people. I would ask, what old people? I don't see no old people here, right? But through becoming an adult, that was their way of translating our culture. Make sure the old people eat before you do. What old people? Who? Did you ask the old people? Ask who? So our culture continues, but it has to be each one has to teach one at some point.
Thank you very much. I don't think I need to.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clavina Brown. I am 22 years old, so I'm a part of the young people crew demographic. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a question, but maybe a thought piece to propose. You mentioned earlier that to reach us, it's something a bit more radical. And I can share experience that impacted me today that I think could be intertwined. So the lady was just speaking a while ago. She stopped me on my way inside and she was saying to me that I have very bright eyes. And she was saying that it could be linked to Ethiopia. And that immediately sparked and grabbed my attention because it's very modern and cool in young people world to know where you come from. You see advertisements from Ancestry.com and all of these other organizations that I'm not really sure it is us behind it, right? Us as black people behind it. So I'm thinking that maybe to grab us, it would be interesting, instead of us going online to get information and send our DNA to someone, what if it could come from you or people like us where the information is given to us instead of us searching for it otherwise? Because I think something like that could grab us as young people. Because when we bring about history, the average young person, it comes across as sometimes, forgive me, maybe boring. But if it can grab us with something like, okay, your features, have you ever wondered why your eyes look like this? Do you know you're linked to this tribe or something like that? And then you intertwine, did you know stuff about your history and you could bring in reparations into that? Like it could be woven in but not directly like, oh, this is history, and because it's not going to, we'll probably scroll past.
So, thank you, Clavina. Here's a fantastic project for the Ministry of Culture in conjunction with the Ministry of Education. Can you imagine if you turn up in school and instead of getting vaccines alone, that same process could provide you with important information about your ancestry? Fabulous project.
And I think that's it. I'm so sorry, we need to stop. Prof, you'll take the one. Yes. It's up to you. The professor. Go ahead.
It's great to be here, and I've just briefly mentioned that my dad was a big Marcus Garvey, and he died never knowing the answers, and it really bothered him why, as black people, that we couldn't free ourselves from the colonial mind. And I know lots of research has been done that shows now that the form of slavery is in our DNA, and that how we react and how we behave is a manifestation of that. And I just think, how do we, like, I suppose I'm asking this question on behalf of my dad, how do we free ourselves from that? How do we change our mindset? And I know for us in the UK, we've got a particular, because we are actually in the lion's den, we're sending our children to school in the British system is really against, especially black boys, and the systemic racism in England is really academic. But also what's happening with us in the Caribbean, a lot of people don't realise, the black Caribbean in the UK is actually on the decline, and that is for lots of reasons, that we're encouraged by the media to marry outside of our race. All you can see is black guys on the media marrying out of their race, particularly so that a lot of black single women, through the lack of visa, it's hard to get a visa to come. So we really are struggling to retain our identity with the next few generations. we are on the decline. And the answer is how do how do we try and keep our culture alive? And it's so great to be here to see that people are still celebrating Marcus Garvey. And I'm going to take so much of this back with me to the UK. So it's questions and a statement, I think I'm saying.
Thank you so much for your comment and your question. Send the children and the grandchildren to the Caribbean for their schooling while we fix the education system day by day to make sure that those who can identify will ultimately identify as peoples of African descent, and that they will in turn return, you know, Miss Lou's colonization in reverse, that we will continue that cycle. Because let's face it, the world is the world. Exchange, cross-fertilization, those are the reasons we exist in the way we exist. We are not going to isolate ourselves. We want to relate to all of the races, but we must know ourselves as we do that. But I want to do something and depart a little bit from the program and ask Professor Lewis to come and have the last word. No? Yes.
Well, this is what Donna McFarlane, who in 2003 was given an empty building and told to make it work. This gathering today, 2025, is exactly what she envisaged. Unfortunately, I also want to welcome the people online, because we are able to reach so many more people with the technology that we have. I think Professor Stanley Niaah has given us a lot to think about with respect to the framework going ahead in terms of how we look at Jamaican and Caribbean identity, and taking Garvey as the guide for how we envisage the future. So I want to thank her for the presentation, and thank you all for coming, listening, and participating. And the young lady who made that comment, very, very important suggestion that need to be taken on board. And the brethren who spoke about that loudspeaker is something that can easily be done, and it will draw people in. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Professor Lewis. Thank you, Professor Stanley Niaah. We are going to have a few remarks by Mr. Brian Royce, or Royce? Wonderful.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please allow me to observe all of the protocols which have been observed prior. I'll keep my remarks very brief because I feel like a lot has been said already, appropriately so. So I'll just begin by saying my name is Brian Royce. I am a campaign manager with the Repair Campaign, which is an advocacy group supporting the call for reparations for the Caribbean. And, you know, it really is a privilege to be here in this esteemed company today. And these brief reflections, I just want to reflect on what has been said as it relates to how this legacy of Garvey informs the present day fight for reparations. And again, thank you to Professor Stanley Niaah for that exceptional breakdown. And, you know, what really stood out to me was the necessity of reclamation of identity at the core of this conversation. Briefly, I'll state that in my capacity working with the Repair Campaign over the past 2 years as a campaign manager, I've had the privilege of traveling to and meeting with reparations committees, activists, government ministers, members of civil society from across the CARICOM region. And in those conversations, the question was, what do you want to see in terms of a repaired society? What would reparations look like to you and your community in a holistic and transformational and structural way? And would you like to know the one thing that everybody says is most important from all of those conversations, almost unilaterally, is that we've heard that repair is about as we've been talking about today, that is about reclaiming an empowered sense of self in one's identity through education. And in particular, they often emphasize re-education for liberation, which is the central theme that has come out through all of the presentations today. You know, repairing a sense of empowered Black identity and psychology by rethinking the way our school systems teach this history. And then second to that, how our societies reinforce these perceptions as to how we see ourselves. Reparations now asks us, imagine, I like this exercise of imagining, imagine what it would look like to see a generation of Jamaicans and Caribbean people, because this is not just a Jamaican movement, rising up with pride in who we are, with a knowledge of where we come from. As Garvey's often quoted remark is, you know, a people without knowledge of their is like a excellent job, class. But imagine what that would look like, to have a repaired sense of where we're coming from and a clear view of where we're going as Caribbean people. A region united in solidarity, as you had said, Prof. Now, today, as calls for repair from colonial institutions grow louder by the week, I'm not sure if we're tuned into the news, every week we see some more progress on a regional and international level. You know, the need for that personal repair is as important as ever, could not be more important in my opinion. And as people of Jamaica and the Caribbean continue to struggle under this colonial legacy that we've inherited, we must take Garvey's teachings very seriously by taking this matter of reparations very seriously, which prioritizes the needs of those who have been historically disempowered as the priority in this conversation. So this is an exhortation to us, right? Even though Garvey's teachings emphasize self-determination, this does not exclude the call for reparation. Self-determination and doing it ourselves does not preclude the reparation which is owed to us. Instead, this struggle to pursue a repaired nation and region must include this moral imperative for seeking and securing reparations from former colonial governments, institutions, families who unjustly extracted unimaginable wealth from this region on the backs of our enslaved ancestors. And so for that reason, we say emphatically that repair is not development aid, it's not a handout, it's not a favor, but it's a moral, historical, legal right that I implore everyone in the room to take up and become a part of this active movement. It is a call to recognize our full dignity and our full humanity, which has historically been denied and intentionally stripped of our ancestors. But this can no longer be the case, is what I'm saying. Garvey never hesitated to speak truth to power. So let us here in this room and as we leave this room be emboldened by his legacy in determining our own futures and demanding justice for the crimes of chattel slavery and colonialism, the impacts of which we still see today across our social and economic landscapes and beyond. So, in conclusion, if you support the call for reparations and reparatory justice, here are two things that you can do to strengthen the movement which is actively growing on a week-by-week basis. Number one is we are supporting the call for reparations by quantifying how many people are in support, how many people are standing in solidarity, so that our leaders, when they continue ongoing dialogue with former colonial countries, they can say, we have the army. Here are the receipts. Here are the people who stand behind us from the Caribbean and from global Africa, united in solidarity. So step one is, we're asking everyone who supports to sign your name in solidarity with the cause for reparations. And you can do this easily online. Repaircampaign.org has a form in which you can, in less than 30 seconds, add your name to strengthen this call. Come and talk to us afterwards. We have these cards that make the technology really easy. And secondly, you know, we're seeking advocates to support the army, to join the cause. People who are passionate about this topic, to raise awareness for the movement and bring the call about the history and the active movement into the communities where you're already doing the work. The teachers and the educators and the activists in the room know what I'm talking about. So, you know, if that's you, we'd be delighted to talk to you after about how you can use the work you're already doing to bring the call for reparations into the communities. because, and I'll close with this, we're approaching a really critical tipping point in the global reparations movement. And the people must be informed, we must be ready to participate in building this future that Garvey would have envisioned for us. So in closing, again, I just want to thank the organizers for this wonderful event, for everyone who participated in this discussion section. Let this not be the end of the conversation, but please come and speak to myself and the other representatives of the Repair Campaign, the Center for Reparation Research, and all the activists who are at the forefront of this movement. Let's have a word. So it's been a privilege sharing this afternoon with you, and I'm looking forward to continuing to connect. Thank you so much.
All right, so I now invite Ms. Rudy and Dennis Copeland to make some acknowledgements, and then we have a musical performance. So stick around for the musical performance by Mr. Desmond Sanders afterwards.
We meet at Liberty Hall, not as cringing sycophants, but as men and women, standing erect and demanding our rights from all quarters. The words of Marcus Mosiah Garvey in Harlem, 1920. Good afternoon. These words, spoken over a century ago, remain profoundly relevant today as we continue to study, honor, and promote the life and legacy of Jamaica's first national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey. As we bring to a close another successful staging of the annual Marcus Mosiah Garvey Lecture and Arambe, it is my honor, on behalf of the Liberty Hall, the Legacy of Marcus Garvey, and the Institute of Jamaica, to extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone who made this 16th lecture commemorating the 138th anniversary of Garvey's birth such an enriching and inspiring occasion. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge Mr. David Brown, Director, Cultural and Entertainment Synergies at MCJES, members of our Council of the Institute of Jamaica, Mr. Oliver Fagan, our Chairman, Mrs. Michelle Creed Nelson, Executive Director of the IOJ, Ms. Faith Anderson, Acting Deputy Executive Director, the Friends of Liberty Hall Foundation, the Marcus Garvey in School Foundation, the dedicated staff of the IOJ, and the Liberty Hall, the legacy of Marcus Garvey. To our distinguished guest lecturer, Professor Sonjah Niaah, Director of the Center of Reparation Research at UWI, thank you for delivering such an invaluable, thought-provoking, and impassioned lecture. Your exploration of the enduring relevance of Garvey's Pan-Africanist philosophy and its influence on reparatory justice movement was both engaging and inspirational. Beyond the lecture itself, your dedication in promoting this event and your passion for Garveyism, even though you said you're not a Garvey scholar, it truly resonated with us. We are very, very grateful. Our deep appreciation also goes to our moderator, Dr. Stanley Griffin, who is an historian, archivist, and the current head of Department of Library and Information Studies at the University of the West Indies, Mona. Thank you for guiding this evening's program with such skill and poise. We are also grateful to our program participants, Ms. Shalrika White, the talented students and teachers of the Liberty Hall Summer Arts Program 2025, and to Mr. Desmond Sanders, who is coming up right after this presentation. To the Repair Campaign team, led by Mr. Brian Royce, and our Arambe contributors, Dr. Tanya Batson-Savage, Mr. and Mrs. Francis, and Mr. Donovan Fairweather, thank you for bringing your unique products, voices, and energy to this year's celebration. But behind every successful event is a dedicated and supporting team. I must therefore recognize our behind-the-scenes team. the senior management team of the Institute of Jamaica, to our very hard-working staff at Liberty Hall, the legacy of Marcus Garvey. None of this would be possible without your support. Our dedicated PR team, the ACIJ-JMB, our AV technician this afternoon, Mr. O'Neill Pasley, the Assets and Accounts Departments, the Center for Reparations Research at UA, members of the media, the King Alarm Group, and the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the Kingston Central Division. Your contributions were integral to the seamless execution of this year's lecture, and I assure you, your efforts have not gone unnoticed. Finally, to you, our audience, both here in person and online, across Jamaica and abroad, thank you for your invaluable support. As I conclude, let us pause to remember with reverence our late former director, Dr. Donna McFarlane, whose vision and dedication gave birth to this annual lecture series. Her legacy lives on through gatherings like these. I encourage you all to continue to support Liberty Hall, the legacy of Marcus Garvey, by visiting the Multimedia Museum or Research and Reference Library, assisting in funding and endorsing our after-school, summer arts, and literacy programs, as well as our outreach engagements. On behalf of Liberty Hall and the Institute of Jamaica, I thank you for your outstanding commitment to making the 16th annual Marcus Mosiah Garvey Lecture and Arambe a resounding success. Good evening.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Come on, greetings, brothers and sisters. I believe we've had some fantastic, let me just help him here. We've had some fantastic discussions this afternoon, and I just want to add my words through the voice of Sam Cooke, who sung this song and who wrote this song from as early as the 1960s. So I think it represents the hope and the fight that we're talking about. I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Then I go to my brother and I said, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. years, there's been times when I thought I wouldn't last for long, but now I know that I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been a long time coming, but I know one day when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Now the war is not over. The victory isn't won till we fight on to the finish. And then when it's all done, we'll cry glory. Oh, glory. Oh, glory. We'll cry glory. Oh, glory. Oh, glory. One day, when the glory comes, I know a change gonna come. Blessings.
Thank you very much. And the task is now mine to say that this activity is now completed. And there are refreshments downstairs. There are refreshments outside. There are items on sale downstairs. Please continue the conversation. Make sure you connect with Mr. Repair, Mr. Royas, and the other members of the crew. Thank you so very much for spending your Sunday with us.